So now we need to talk about how we find our limit analytically using our algebra and calculus methods together. So we talked about in class why this method works, but basically when we're trying to find a limit, we are going to plug in c. And if that gives us a finite number, then we are done. If it gives us 0 over 0, then that means we actually have a hole where the limit is. And so we need to cancel out or cross out that hole to find a function that agrees at all but one point, and then that will give us our limit. So from a practical standpoint, that means that when we plug in and we get 0 over 0, we will factor, then cancel out the factor or cross out the factor and plug in. And we discussed how if you have a limit that is going to c, you can almost think about that arrow as becoming a minus sign. And what your goal is going to be is to cross out or cancel this x minus c factor in both the numerator and the denominator. So when you are given a limit to evaluate analytically, the first thing that you always try is to plug in c. So our c is the number that we are approaching. So in this case, we are going to plug in x is equal to 2. Now when I do that off to the side here, I get 5 times 2 plus 5, and that gives us 10 plus 5 and 15. And 15, of course, is a finite number, and so that tells us that we are done and that this limit is going to be equal to 15. So 15 is our answer. All right, let's look at another one. So if we have this limit here as x goes to 2, our first line of attack is going to be to first see what happens when we plug in x is equal to 2. So if I plug in 2 squared plus 4 over 2 plus 2, what I see here is that I get 4 plus 4, so that gives us 8, over 2 plus 2 gives us 4, and that again is a finite number. That is just equal to 2. So that tells us that our limit will be equal to 2. All right, so let's look at some other examples of where it's not going to be as straightforward as just plug in and you get a finite number. So in this case, if I have the limit as x goes to 8 of x squared minus 64 over x minus 8. Well, if I just immediately plug in x is equal to 8, which is always my first step, I get 8 squared minus 64 over 8 minus 8. And that, of course, gives us 0 over 0. So when we get that 0 over 0, we want to say to ourselves, all right, it's time to factor and then cross out or cancel and then plug in as our last step. And again, there's not some big surprise as to what we're trying to cancel. If we have x going to 8, that means our goal is to cancel out an x minus 8 in both the numerator and the denominator. All right, so we're first going to have to factor. And when you look at this x squared minus 64, that is a very special polynomial because that is a difference of 2 squares. So as a difference of 2 squares, we have a perfect square in this x squared and a perfect square in 64. We take the square root of the first term, which is just our x squared, and that gives us x. We take the square root of the last term, and you'll notice that I'm not including this negative, so it's just the number 64, and that gives us 8. So the difference of 2 squares says that it will be x and 8, x and 8, and then to get the middle term to cross out, we will need to have one positive and one negative. That way, when we FOIL, it will become a positive 8x and a minus 8x, which will give us the 0x, no middle term. All right, so using our factorization of the difference of 2 squares, we are going to go down below here, and we're going to say that the limit, still having the limit notation here, is going to be factoring x squared minus 64 gives us x plus 8, x minus 8, divided by x minus 8. Now, at this point, you notice that exactly what needs to happen happens. The x minus 8s can cross out or cancel, and you have the limit as x goes to 8 of x plus 8. So now we are ready to plug in. Now, when we plug in, remember that is the point where you lose the limit notation. So as soon as you plug in and get a finite number, you lose the whole limit as x goes to c. So here I will have 8 being plugged in for x because x is going to 8, and then plus 8 is equal to 16. So that is our answer. What we are saying is that the limit as x goes to 8 of x squared minus 64 over x minus 8 is equal to 16.